kind of like as a baseline, I'm wondering, like how do you distinguish, or what's the difference between like mRNA focused research and broader RNA research in terms of their funding needs and what their scientific impact is?
Yeah. So uh, we need to distinguish between mRNA and RNA in general. So RNA in general, RNA is a molecule, ribonucleic acid, that comprises oligonucleotides, and it could be used, and it's used by nature and by scientists for different purposes. mRNA is just one of the forms of a much larger RNA family. And mRNA is just a molecule that exists in our cells to transcribe DNA information and produce proteins. So it's part of our genetic mechanism. And some viruses use just RNAs for their genetic purposes, such as COVID virus. So COVID virus uses RNA to produce proteins, including the spike protein, that is the protein in question in the mRNA vaccines. Uh, so in general, RNA molecules are used, like I said, for multiple purposes in science. So it's a very large area of research of which mRNA is just part of it. And I work in the area of RNA therapeutics. I work in the area of RNA immunotherapeutics for cancer. So it could be used, like I said, not just necessarily as vaccines for viruses, but also as vaccines for cancer and as a cancer therapeutics, not just vaccines, but something that treats cancer. And in that realm, my biggest concern is that the current funding for mRNA vaccines specifically could mean the maybe next step in cutting funding for the entire RNA research, whether they connected to vaccines or not, whether they connected to viral vaccines or vaccines for cancer, which are two different things. So that's the biggest concern that I have. It's sort of like for lay people, it takes a while to explain the difference between, mRNA specific molecule and RNA molecules in general. And when people hear the word RNA, they just get upset and defensive because of this, whole controversy around mRNA vaccines. So what I'm concerned about, like I said, that there could be a situation when we could throw a baby with the bathwater, when we have, current funding in mRNA vaccines, but that would lead to a further funding, further current funding for RNA research in general, even if it's not connected to vaccines. Not that I support cutting for funding for mRNA vaccines. I don't support that. I think it's a very it's a wrong decision. But again, it could lead to further cut in just a name RNA if the name RNA attached to it.
That concern about the political and public skepticism towards mRNA technology, right? It's almost like a buzzword nowadays. You know, you hear mRNA, and there are people, especially people who are hesitant to vaccines, who have I guess you could call it outrage towards that specific topic. And so I guess I just want to reiterate, right? You are concerned that this political and public skepticism towards mRNA technology could lead to less support for RNA research, like, your cancer therapies or molecular imaging and et cetera.
Correct. Yes, that's the concern that the like you said, the buzzword RNA, people, don't know if like a little M attached to it or not. They hear RNA and they get concerned. And it's public skepticism. It's a very correct word for it. And it's actually pretty amazing how many virologists are out there, each having their own opinion about, mRNA vaccines, or even though they never took virology in their life. And I personally have many situations when I had to talk to people, uh, even scientists from different areas, not from biology, and explain to them that, this is how it works. This is why it's safe. This is why, this is why you should get vaccinated. But it is very hard to overcome that.
The $500 million cut, I think, was the number I saw in
Yeah.
federal mRNA vaccine funding. How will this affect, ongoing or future RNA research projects at MSU, and what could a potential, like, if there is further cuts to, RNA research as a whole, as a broader whole, I guess, can you maybe outline some of the impacts that would have, and what might happen, or I guess in this case what wouldn't happen?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, at MSU, as far as I know, we're not working with mRNA vaccines, but we're working with RNA therapeutics in general. So I think that cutting research to mRNA vaccine is going to lead to basically closing some research areas that could be very, very important, not just for epidemiology, but for other fields of science, such as cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Because, like I said, this technology, it's just a principle. mRNA is a principle. It's not specifically for COVID. It could be used for other viruses. It could be used for other diseases, like I mentioned before. So I also think that, it also diminishes our ability to respond fast to possible pandemic situations, because the beauty of mRNA vaccines is that they can be produced very fast. They can be produced very fast. It doesn't cost much now that we, develop the technology. So the response could be very fast. And by cutting this research, cutting money to this important research, we're basically shooting ourselves in the foot, because there are new viruses and new things that, new strains, they happen all the time. And we just basically cutting this whole, huge area of research, and we putting our population in danger.
What steps do you think that institutions or policymakers might be able to take that could protect RNA research from being affected by controversies surrounding mRNA vaccines or mRNA research as a whole?
Right. Well, I think, first and foremost is to provide information and basically make sure that what we're doing in the lab is available for public to know exactly what we're doing. I don't want to have any, I want to have a full transparency at what we do, because again, with, mRNA vaccines, you hear things like, oh, they inserted those chips, or they inserted those nanoparticles or something. I mean, this is, to me, this is silly, but, I understand how people are concerned. So we need full transparency. We need to be open. We need to reach out to communities. We need to explain to them how important this research is, and how important to continue and fund this research is. So I think transparency is one thing, and education is the second thing. And as far as our policymakers, I think it would be very important to reach out to them. And I'm sure after this, sorry, after this announcement, I'm sure there is a big uproar in biomedical community. And if there are any hearings that could be scheduled to convince our policymakers to reverse their decision, because again, I had a chance to look. I didn't spend a lot of time, but I had a chance to look at their reasons, because it's not that they just cut 500 million. They had some reasons, and they published that. And I looked at the papers that they mentioned that, showing the danger well, they're not showing exactly the danger of mRNA vaccines, but they're showing the danger of spike protein, which actually comes from COVID. So, and again, I can go into, molecular biology and virology and explain the difference between the vaccine, how the spike protein works in vaccine and how spike proteins works in the virus. It's a big difference. And maybe there has to be some even cartoons made, like a very simple cartoons showing the differences and showing why one is safe and another is not. Another, I mean, the virus itself. So I don't know. The outreach, public outreach, is extremely important, and talking to our policymakers is important too.
And lastly, I keep seeing this reaction. This was actually specifically after we covered a story earlier this week on the USAID cuts, and there were impacts to the Michigan State Agricultural College, right? And somebody in reaction to the uh, article, it was a Facebook comment. I'm not saying that this is necessarily maybe the brightest reaction. However, I do think that there is a misconception that Michigan State and other universities could just fund their own research, right? Because the framing of the article was that Michigan State was forced to lay off these 19 workers, and their employment was tied to these USAID grants, right? And I used to work in communications on a grant, so I used to be a worker funded at MSU by a government grant, out of the Michigan State Legislature. And so I understand how, that works. And, these are fixed term workers and, whatnot. But could you maybe just explain why it isn't realistic to maybe expect, a university, even though, we know that they have, a lot of money, but why it isn't realistic for universities to fund their own research and why government funded research is necessary for scientific discovery.
Yeah, I just have to say that I don't think I think it's a little misconception that MSU specifically has a lot of money in general, let's say compared to Harvard again, right? So, but funding its own research, it's a very, very expensive proposition. And the primary goal of the university is education. That's our goal. And research, I'm not saying it's a secondary goal, but it goes along with education. But while education, and let's face it, education provides some funding for the university, right? Because students pay tuition. The research itself, it's not a lucrative endeavor. Research itself does not bring any money. Research, the only thing the research does is spending money. In other, of course, in the future, when you produce a therapeutic and then a company starts developing it and then it goes to the clinic and insurance company starts covering for it, yes, somebody will at some point see the profit. But when it starts at the lab bench, when it starts with just our thoughts, how to, for example, treat a certain type of cancer with certain specific mutations, it's all on us. Nobody's gonna give me money just to do that, how to say what the words I'm looking for, satisfy my scientific curiosity, right? So I have to do some preliminary studies. I have to prove that this is working, and then I have to compete for NIH grants. And considering that only 10% of the grants are funded, it's a very fierce competition for us. So, but the university itself, they have funds, they have some funds, pilot funds, that would give you certain amount of money just to show the proof of principle so we can submit all those grants to NIH and get more funding. But the university itself, I don't know about all universities. I don't know, maybe Harvard can do that, but MSU, I don't think they can fund the entire, scientific research that's going on. It's just not a reasonable even proposition. So, and the research is getting more and more expensive every year.
Interesting. Well, that's good to know. Thank you for answering that. And I got to go to another interview that starts in
Sure,
a
of
couple minutes.
course.
But I really, really, really appreciate your insight and talking with me.